You wake up. Before you even open your eyes, you feel it. A dull pressure sitting low in your stomach like a fist resting just under your ribs that never fully relaxes. You press your palm against your abdomen, and it feels firm, almost swollen, even though you haven't eaten anything yet. This is not random. This is the end result of a process that started days ago, one you never actually felt happening until now. To understand what's going on inside you, you have to understand what your gut actually is. Your digestive tract is not a simple tube. It is roughly 9 meters of muscle, nerve endings, and trillions of bacteria, all working together in a rhythm called peristalsis, a slow, wave-like squeezing motion that pushes food forward, hour after hour, day after day. This motion isn't voluntary. You don't consciously tell your intestines to squeeze. It's controlled by something scientists call the enteric nervous system, a network of over 500 million neurons lining your gut wall, often nicknamed the second brain. It talks constantly with your actual brain through the vagus nerve, which means what happens in your gut can shape your mood, and what happens in your mind can shape your gut. This is stage 1 of what you're experiencing, the early biological trigger. And it usually starts with something deceptively small. Maybe it was a week of eating more processed food than usual. Maybe you weren't drinking enough water. Maybe stress had your nervous system locked in a low-grade fight or flight state, which, and this part surprises most people, actively slows digestion down because your body doesn't prioritize moving waste through your colon when it thinks you might need to run from danger. Whatever the trigger, the result is the same: less fiber, less water, and less rhythmic motion reaching your large intestine. And your large intestine is where this story really begins. Here's the part most people never learn in school. By the time food waste reaches your colon, almost all the nutrients have already been absorbed. What's left is water, fiber, and bacteria. Your colon's main job at this point is to absorb the remaining water back into your body before the waste is pushed out. Under normal conditions, this is a beautifully timed process. Waste moves through in about 12 to 48 hours, and just enough water is pulled out to form a soft, easy-to-pass stool. But when peristalsis slows down because of low fiber, dehydration, or nervous system stress, the waste sits in your colon longer than it should, and every extra hour it sits there, your colon keeps doing its job, pulling out water. More time, more water removed, harder the stool becomes. This is stage 2, internal system response, and it's the moment your body's own efficiency starts working against you. You don't feel this stage directly, not yet. What you feel is subtler, a slight fullness after meals that wasn't there before, a little more effort needed to feel finished on the toilet, maybe a passing thought of, "That's odd," before you move on with your day. But inside, your colon wall is stretching slightly more than usual with each passing hour, and stretch receptors embedded in the intestinal wall are sending a steady stream of signals up through the vagus nerve to your brainstem. Your nervous system is beginning to register that something in the timing has shifted. By day 2 or 3 of this slower transit, your gut microbiome starts to shift as well. The trillions of bacteria living in your colon depend on fiber to survive, specifically a process called fermentation, where certain gut bacteria break down fiber into short-chain fatty acids, compounds that nourish your colon's lining, reduce inflammation, and even help regulate the very muscle contractions that move waste forward. When fiber intake drops, these beneficial bacteria have less to feed on, and their population shrinks, while less fiber-dependent, sometimes gas-producing bacteria expand to fill the space. This is why you start to feel bloated. Not just because waste is sitting there, but because the ecosystem responsible for smooth digestion is quietly rebalancing itself in the wrong direction. This marks the beginning of stage 3, immune and neural adaptation, where your body starts treating this slowdown not as a one-off event, but as a new normal it has to adjust to. Your enteric nervous system, remember, the second brain, lining your gut, begins altering its own contraction patterns in response to the drier, harder mass sitting in your colon. Muscle needs a certain amount of resistance and moisture to trigger a strong, coordinated peristaltic wave. A hard, dry stool provides poor traction for these contractions, meaning your gut has to work harder for a weaker result. It's like trying to push a rigid block through a soft tube versus pushing a smooth, well-lubricated one. The mechanics themselves become inefficient. Meanwhile, immune cells embedded in your gut lining, called the gut-associated lymphoid tissue, begin responding to the shift in bacterial balance and slightly increased pressure on the intestinal wall. Low-grade inflammation starts to build, not enough to cause pain yet, but enough to make your gut lining more sensitive than usual. This is when people typically first say, "Something feels off." Your appetite might shift. Some people eat less without noticing, because a stretched colon signals partial fullness to the brain even on an empty stomach. Others crave heavier, denser food, as if the body is confused about what it actually needs. Your skin might look slightly duller, not from anything mystical, but because inflammation and disrupted digestion can affect nutrient absorption and hydration status, both of which show up in the skin. And your mood, this is the part almost nobody connects, can dip slightly. Remember that vagus nerve connection? Roughly 90% of the signals traveling along it go from your gut up to your brain, not the other way around. When your gut is inflamed and under pressure, that signal traffic changes, and it can genuinely nudge you toward feeling a bit more irritable, foggy, or low energy days before you'd ever think to blame your bowels for it. By now, 3, 4, maybe 5 days have passed since the original trigger. What started as a barely noticeable shift in timing has become a chain reaction, slower motion, drier stool, shifting bacteria, low-grade inflammation, and a brain that's quietly registering all of it. Your body hasn't broken down. It's adapting exactly the way it's designed to, but adaptation to the wrong pattern is still adaptation. And if nothing changes, this system doesn't reset on its own. It escalates. And that's exactly where things get uncomfortable, because in the next stage, your body stops adjusting quietly in the background and starts forcing you to notice through sensations that are hard to ignore, and a nervous system response most people have felt but never understood. By the time you reach this point, your body has stopped whispering and started raising its voice. The dull morning pressure you first noticed has evolved into something more persistent, a heaviness that doesn't fully go away even after you eat, drink water, or move around. This is stage 4, functional changes, the point where the slow internal shift you couldn't feel becomes a physical reality you absolutely can. Your colon, remember, has been dealing with waste that moves through slower than usual, which means more water keeps getting pulled out with every extra hour it sits there. What was once a soft, well-formed stool has become firmer, sometimes segmented, harder to pass without extra effort. This isn't just uncomfortable. It changes the mechanics of the muscles involved. Your rectum, the final holding chamber before elimination, has stretch receptors that normally trigger a clear, strong urge once it fills to a certain point. But when stool sits there longer and stretches the rectal wall more gradually rather than suddenly, those receptors can become less responsive over time, a phenomenon related to what's sometimes called rectal desensitization. In simple terms, the signal that tells you it's time to go becomes weaker and less reliable, which paradoxically makes the problem worse because you're now getting less clear warning from a body that needs you to respond sooner, not later. This is also the stage where bloating becomes visibly noticeable. Your abdomen may look slightly distended by the evening, even if you haven't eaten a large meal. 2 things are happening simultaneously here. First, the shifted bacterial balance from stage 3 is now producing more gas, as bacteria ferment the fiber and food remnants that are moving through more slowly. More time in the gut means more fermentation time, means more gas buildup. Second, a distended colon physically pushes outward against your abdominal wall, which is why pressing on your stomach can feel firm, sometimes tender. Some people describe it as feeling pregnant by the end of the day. That description is more biologically accurate than people realize. It's literal volume and pressure from retained material and gas, not just a feeling. Your nervous system's response deepens here too. Chronic mild stretching and inflammation in the gut wall doesn't just send signals to your brainstem for basic reflexes anymore. It starts influencing higher brain regions involved in mood regulation and attention. Researchers studying the gut-brain axis have found that persistent low-grade gut inflammation is associated with increased activity in brain regions tied to discomfort processing and decreased activity in regions tied to calm, focused attention. This is not in your head, in the dismissive sense people use that phrase. It is, quite literally, in communication with your head through a real, measurable neural pathway. This is why chronic digestive discomfort so often comes bundled with brain fog, a shorter fuse, and a general sense of being off that's hard to pin on any one thing. Sleep is affected too, and this is where the cycle starts to reinforce itself. Your vagus nerve plays a major role in shifting your body between sympathetic, alert states and parasympathetic, rest and digest states. A gut under chronic low-grade stress sends signals that keep your nervous system slightly more activated than it should be at night, making deep, restorative sleep harder to reach. And poor sleep, in turn, is known to slow gut motility even further and disrupt the very bacterial populations your colon depends on for smooth function. You're now inside a loop. Slower gut movement disrupts sleep, and disrupted sleep slows gut movement further. Neither cause nor effect anymore, just a closed circuit feeding itself. If this pattern continues without any correction, no added fiber, no added water, no reduction in the stress signals telling your gut to stay guarded, the body moves into stage 5, system breakdown. This is the stage where discomfort becomes difficult to ignore. The colon, chronically distended and under more pressure than it's built to sustain regularly, can develop small outward bulges in its wall over years of repeated strain. particularly in areas of the lower colon where pressure is highest, a structural change that's well documented in people with long-term unaddressed irregular bowel patterns. This is not something that happens overnight, and it is not the story of one bad week. It's what your gut is trying to warn you about long before it gets anywhere close to that point. In the short term, though, system breakdown looks more immediate and more familiar. Cramping that comes in waves, a sense of urgency that doesn't resolve, straining that puts real mechanical pressure on the blood vessels around your rectum, sometimes leading to minor, temporary irritation in that area. Your heart rate can even tick up slightly during straining, because the increased abdominal pressure activates a reflex that temporarily affects blood pressure and heart rhythm, which is part of why doctors generally advise against excessive straining, especially in people with underlying cardiovascular concerns. Your body, in other words, is now spending real physiological effort, muscular, cardiovascular, neurological, trying to compensate for a system that's been under strain for days. And this is exactly when your body activates something remarkable. Stage 6, compensatory survival mode. Faced with a system that isn't functioning the way it should, your gut doesn't simply give up. It reallocates resources. Blood flow to the digestive tract can shift slightly to prioritize the colon's ability to keep absorbing water and attempting contractions, sometimes at the expense of blood flow available for other non-essential processes, which is part of why chronic digestive strain can leave you feeling fatigued in a way that doesn't match how much you've physically done that day. Your gut bacteria, too, begin adapting to the new environment. Some species that thrive on less fiber and slower transit times begin to dominate the microbiome, further reinforcing the very conditions that created the slowdown in the first place. Your body isn't malfunctioning here. It's doing exactly what evolution built it to do, stabilizing around whatever conditions it's actually experiencing, even if those conditions aren't the ones that are best for you. This is the point where most people finally reach for a solution. And it's also the point where the wrong solution can make things worse. Harsh stimulant approaches can force a short-term response while further disrupting the delicate bacterial and neural balance your gut has been trying to maintain. What your gut actually needs at this stage isn't force. It needs exactly the raw materials it's been missing. Specific types of fiber, specific hydration signals, and specific bacterial support delivered in a way that works with the biology you've just spent the last 10 minutes understanding, not against it. And that brings us to the turning point, the exact 5 biological interventions capable of reversing every stage you've just witnessed, explained one at a time, starting with the fruit that a leading nutrition scientist has called one of the most quietly powerful tools for digestive repair. This is stage 7, long-term adaptation. The stage where, instead of your body compensating for a broken pattern, you actively feed it what it needs to rebuild the correct one. And it starts with understanding a simple biological truth that Dr. William Li, a physician and researcher known for his work connecting food to the body's internal healing systems, has emphasized repeatedly: your gut isn't waiting for a fix. It's waiting for the right raw materials, delivered consistently, so its own natural repair processes can take over. The first of those materials is papaya. Papaya contains an enzyme called papain, which helps break down proteins during digestion, easing the workload on your stomach and small intestine so that food moves through more efficiently before it ever reaches your colon. But papaya's real power for a sluggish gut comes from its fiber content, a mix of soluble and insoluble fiber that does 2 jobs at once. The soluble portion absorbs water and forms a gel-like substance that softens stool directly, while the insoluble portion adds bulk that physically stimulates the stretch receptors in your intestinal wall, triggering the very peristaltic contractions that had slowed down back in stage 2. Within hours of eating papaya, your gut isn't just receiving passive nutrition. It's receiving a direct mechanical signal to start moving again. The second is figs. Figs are one of the richest natural sources of fiber per serving, and they contain a specific type of soluble fiber that becomes a preferred food source for the beneficial bacteria in your colon, the same bacteria that were crowded out back in stage 3. When these bacteria ferment fig fiber, they produce short-chain fatty acids, the compounds that nourish your colon lining, reduce the low-grade inflammation that built up over days, and help restore the more efficient contraction patterns your enteric nervous system had abandoned. Figs also contain natural sugars and compounds that have a mild, gentle osmotic effect, drawing a small amount of extra water into the colon, directly counteracting the excessive water removal that made your stool harder in the first place. The third is water, specifically water with lemon, and this one is deceptively simple. Your colon cannot soften stool or maintain smooth peristalsis without adequate hydration, full stop. Every gram of fiber you eat needs water to do its job. Fiber without enough water can actually make stool bulker without making it easier to pass. Lemon adds a small amount of vitamin C and citric acid, which can gently stimulate digestive secretions and support the body's natural morning reflex, a phenomenon called the gastrocolic reflex, where eating or drinking after a period of fasting triggers increased colon activity. Drinking water first thing in the morning before food leverages this reflex at its strongest natural point in your daily rhythm. The fourth is flaxseed, and this is where the science gets particularly precise. Flax seeds are rich in a type of soluble fiber called mucilage, which forms a slippery, gel-like coating as it absorbs water, quite literally lubricating the passage of stool through your intestines. They're also one of the best plant sources of omega-3 fatty acids, specifically alpha-linolenic acid, which research has linked to reduced inflammation throughout the digestive tract. Remember the low-grade inflammation from stage 3 quietly sensitizing your gut lining? Omega-3s work directly against that process. For flaxseed to work effectively, though, the seeds need to be ground rather than eaten whole, since whole flax seeds often pass through the digestive tract largely intact, without releasing their fiber and nutrients where your body needs them. The fifth is yogurt, specifically yogurt containing live, active bacterial cultures. This is the piece that directly repairs the microbiome disruption from stage 3 and stage 6. Probiotic strains found in fermented dairy, commonly lactobacillus and bifidobacterium species, can help replenish the beneficial bacterial populations that were crowded out during the slowdown, restoring the fermentation processes responsible for short-chain fatty acid production. Dr. Lee's broader body of work on food and the body's internal defense systems has repeatedly pointed to fermented foods as one of the most direct ways to influence the trillions of microorganisms that, in turn, influence nearly every stage of digestion you've just learned about, from motility to inflammation to the strength of the gut-brain signal shaping your mood and energy. What's remarkable is how these 5 foods map directly onto the exact biological breakdown you experienced. Papaya restores mechanical movement. Figs restore bacterial balance and add gentle water retention. Lemon water restores baseline hydration and leverages your body's natural morning reflex. Flaxseed lubricates the passage and calms inflammation. Yogurt rebuilds the bacterial ecosystem your gut depends on for everything else to function. None of these work through force. Each one works by giving your gut exactly the raw material it was missing at each stage of the breakdown you just walked through. This is stage 8, new biological baseline. The point where, given consistent access to fiber, hydration, and bacterial support, your gut doesn't just recover for a day. It recalibrates. Peristalsis returns to its efficient, well-timed rhythm. Your rectal stretch receptors regain their sensitivity, giving you clear, reliable signals again, instead of the dulled, delayed ones from stage 4. Your microbiome shifts back toward fiber-loving, short-chain fatty acid-producing bacteria. The low-grade inflammation that had been quietly influencing your mood and focus through the vagus nerve begins to resolve, and with it, some of that brain fog and irritability tends to lift as well, a reminder that a huge amount of how you feel day to day is shaped by conversations happening in your gut, long before you ever consciously notice them. None of this happens through one meal or one perfect day. Your gut, like every other system in your body, responds to consistency, the same way it adapted. Stage by stage into a slower, less efficient pattern, it can adapt back into an efficient one, given the same patient, repeated signal. The biology you now understand isn't a mystery anymore. It's a system responding exactly as it's designed to whatever information, or lack of it, you give it. And that's really the story your body has been trying to tell you the entire time. It was never broken. It was adapting faithfully to whatever it was given. The only question left is what you choose to give it starting tonight.